Tony DeAngelo back here in Connecticut morning, the April 23rd, 2013 edition. Did you see Jackie Robinson hit that ball? I didn't. I'm not quite that old, but I did see 42 this past Saturday, and I was quite impressed by the work that was done. It's certainly worth the few dollars to get out there, and it really takes you back to a time that most of us certainly have not seen. I can't tell you how pleased I am to be joined by Daniel Lilie. Dan, I knew Dan years ago from some common things that we were dealing in. He is a freelance author and occasional radio personality. He has an abiding interest in the intersection between amateur sport and urban culture. He's been a regular columnist for Time Out New York and Inline Hockey News, and has contributed feature pieces to Inline Magazine. Dan has also appeared as a guest on World Football Daily, the largest subscription-based podcast of its kind. Dan was so kind to send along a copy of his recent book, which I'll tell you, I've just started scratching the surface of this, and there are times I had to pick it up off the floor because I was laughing so hard reading it. Not that it's all funny, but it's certainly indicative of a culture that we both experienced. And the title of the book is called Soccer in the Weeds, Bad Hair Jews and Chasing the Beautiful Game. And Dan, it's just a question of where we begin, but first of all, it's been a long time, my friend.
Yes, it's great to be here, Tony, and it's always great to connect with fellow Stanfordites. I guess that's the proper adjective. But
the proper adjective.
It was a wonderful era, and I really had fun harkening back to the day.
Now, a little bit of historical perspective or useless information, whatever way you want to classify it. I actually was a soccer player at the then Turner River Junior High School in 1968 and 1969. And when I would mention the term soccer then, now you were playing in high school in the 70s, several years separate us, people actually thought that soccer was handball. They had no idea as to what this game was. And you take this thing from your, socio-economical, political perspective in Stanford, transitioning from a parochial school to a high school, and I mean, much too much to get into a short description, but what got you fixated on this journey to really just this magnificent book and these characteristics of people whom we both knew that are so descriptive, in my estimation?
Well, that's a fantastic question, Tony, and really it was a confluence of factors that provided, as time went on, and there were a few things that kind of, I had grown up with soccer in my house through my dad, and really it was his family. His father played the game, but his uncles were avid players, and they were immigrants from Germany, Jewish German immigrants. So there was always this cultural context of soccer in my house growing up, but it was in very, very dramatic contrast to my neighborhood and the town I grew up in, Stanford. And, basically growing up with soccer and continuing to play. I still play, by the way. I just turned 54, so I'm still limping around in my men's league out here in California. But soccer's gone through dramatic changes in this country, and there are, just to the casual observer, and certainly in my experience, there's very few voices of sort of the historic, character of soccer in America. And really, I guess what the main impetus was, over time, you kind of get frustrated with people who are new to the sport and really pretend like it was invented in 1990. So that's, I guess, the tipping point for me.
And you really bring this thing back so well generationally, and it's kind of twofold in the sense that you so well describe and document what had taken place in Stanford from perhaps the mid-1960s, the dreaded urban renewal, where this entire downtown was kind of blasted to shreds to put something there, to which I don't think anybody really understands today what it is. And just the whole, the split of the schools, and you know, you're walking into a school, West Hill High School, that's a confluence of just so many things, and you did such a great job of just what all of that felt like. And it's just amazing to me that, you know, there's someone out there that, you know, at least the impression it made upon me, it seemed to have made an even greater one upon you.
Well, and thanks for that. You know, I appreciate that. And I sort of took it upon myself to be, you know, I'm a self-designated soccer historian for Stanford, but you know, beyond that, Stanford itself, you know, growing up there, and I suspect you experienced the same thing, always suffered from an identity crisis. And I think it's a vastly better place today than it was when we grew up. But nevertheless, it still seems, you know, in relation to the rest of Fairfield County and Connecticut and New England, for that matter, and a lot of other places in America, it always seemed that for a place with the kind of resources Stanford had and the kind of affluence it had, that it was, you know, sorely lacking in community spirit. And really, you know, the story of soccer in Stanford is just, you know, one of millions of soccer stories around the world. This is a soccer story. But to me, the fascinating thing about soccer, and as much as I grew up a Mets fanatic and played baseball and you know, loved all sports really, but you know, for me, one of the distinguishing characteristics, perhaps the most distinct characteristic of soccer, is that it is a shared experience for people around the world. And there's, you know, virtually, and there are many other, you know, fantastic books that, you know, reveal that story. But this is fairly unique in the sense that, you know, as far as I know, it's one of the few from, you know, this part of the world in that era. You know, hopefully it's something that other people in other places around the country and even the world can relate to a bit.
Well, and you so well describe what it's like being a Stanford kid and having some, whatever you want to call it, and tastes of awareness of affluence around you, but yet you're not really quite there. You really haven't been invited to the picnic. I mean, if you're me living in Bull's Head, the picnic left you long ago. But yet there's places like Greenwich and Westport and New Canaan that are just like, you know, they're almost within bicycling distance, but yet they're like so untouchable relative to where you sit. And you did such a great job in portraying that.
Well, you know, I often say to people that, you know, in some respects, in our society, you know, clearly, if you've got you know, if you're born to affluence, you know, there are challenges. Of course, there are challenges that come with sort of any circumstance in life. But you know, in some ways, you kind of have a head start. Clearly, in a lot of respects, if you're born affluent. In a funny way, sometimes you have a head start if you're born, you know, with very little or nothing, because, you know, you sort of, if you're the type of person that has that fire in the belly and you want to overcome your circumstances, you know, you look around you and it's pretty easy to say you want to get out. For guys like us who kind of grew up in the middle, you know, sometimes you're just on cruise-o-matic, but you have, you know, in my case, I think the advantage it conveyed in my case was that you can look up and you can look down. You have this sort of middle of the road perspective, which you know, is kind of interesting because in a lot of cases I found growing up in Fairfield County, you were neither fish nor fowl. You know, West Hill High School, let's talk about that for a second, because you know, West Hill was a place I think ultimately that was great if you were tracking, you know, at the very high end, or in my case, it wasn't great. Let me retract that a little bit. The focus when I was there was, you know, there were clearly kids who school. There was busing. I think a lot of kids were aggrieved, and rightfully so, that they were dragged an hour, away from their homes every morning. They had to travel a couple hours to and from school. And my recollection was that there was just an inordinate amount of attention paid to just trying to stabilize the conditions and the atmosphere at the school. And it was interesting, from for kids who were just sort of looking to do their studies, there was a little bit of neglect for a while. They weren't quite sure. They were just happy that the top half of the kids were attending school. But that was sort of something that I started to see through soccer. The lens of soccer was here we had a United Nations outfit, and then traveling to other schools. It was very different. That was a very different atmosphere.
Now, you mentioned the Staples High School program in more than one place, and I guess from what I'm gathering, this more or less was kind of like the Yankees of school soccer.
No doubt, and this was something that also came with time. Obviously, at the time, Staples was the premier program in our region, and I dare say the state. There may have been one or two. E.O. Smith, I think, had an equally strong, impressive program. But Staples, arguably, was one of the best soccer programs in the country, from its inception, I think in the mid-late 50s, and really through today. The tradition continues under Daniel Lilie. But I began to think, and I began to start to connect the dots with Staples soccer and what was going on a global stage. And in particular, what was going on at a global stage, and this sounds a bit far-fetched, but, the Dutch played a system of soccer that has, become known around the world as total football. And really, with the benefit of hindsight, I started seeing sort of a connection between what was going on with Staples soccer in the 70s and what was going on with the Dutch total football system. And, the Staples coach back then, a guy named Albie Leffler, I'm not sure if he ever, and I'm kind of interested at some point to talk to people who knew him back then, whether he was sort of intentionally making that connection with his program. But in an extraordinary way, I think Staples had this psychic and intangible connection with Dutch soccer.
And it's really something, and I think that I don't think, but my impressions, through this entire thing and reading that was, here you are, a Jewish young man coming onto a team of, varying ethnicities, and, as you explained it, this was a game that was played for immigrants and by immigrants, and you're all trying to get a team together, and just that whole thing of, okay, we're in this really weird school, and we've got a coach that doesn't necessarily want to be here, and it's just and you look at this machine, and it's like, okay, well, what do we do now? And you just did such a great job with that, and just the whole perception of what it was like to be in Stanford, in school, in the 70s, and saying, what are these people doing to us? It's like
Well, that was the thing, and it became, I was frustrated at the time. As much as I loved soccer, and I'd love to play soccer for a whole bunch of reasons. One, it's a great sport to play, and I think that's corroborated by, several hundred million people around the world. It was also, a vanity thing to a certain extent. I was a pretty good athlete, and I probably could have played, I could have played football. I'm not saying I would have been a star, but I could have played, I was a good baseball player, pretty good in other sports. But soccer was interesting. Soccer, there was something I just liked about it because not a lot of other people were playing it. So, from a contrarian point of view, I thought it was kind of cool. Now, the history would suggest that it was also maybe kind of an outlier and probably if you know from playing at Turner River, a little bit strange. And that was the other incredible thing about it, was that people have a hard time believing this, but nobody, soccer was such a strange sport that kids didn't even own soccer balls. Nobody even had soccer equipment. There was no such thing. You didn't casually have, I was the only kid who owned any soccer equipment in the entirety of my, neighborhood, which was, Castlewood Park and Three Lakes,
right.
150 or so track homes. Not a single other kid owned a soccer ball. Yeah, which is astonishing, when you think about it today.
Well, and I can remember that because I remember that when we started, and this is going back to Nicky G and Cola, name you're chuckling.
Yeah.
And we're in Turner River in 1968, and Nicky's out of that Don Lacerenza mode as far as being a coach, and we're running out in the field, we're kicking volleyballs, until it was like, oh, there is such a thing as a soccer ball. It's really something.
That's right. And that was, that was one of my first experiences, and it sort of, actually, that's what led me to kind of, finally, go play. Because freshman year, I was so blindsided by the size of West Hill and so intimidated by going from a tiny parochial school to this, giant public high school with kids from, all different kinds of backgrounds, ethnicities, races, that I was literally stunned in the headlights. But they had soccer in gym, and I remember, one of those guys, Gene Cola or Smith or Lacerenza, he's kind of, I think it was one of those red bouncing balls. They just threw it out in the field and just somebody grunted, the word soccer. So that was apparently, the code for we're playing soccer this module. And I remember I was so vastly better at it than everybody else, and people were kind of remarking it, because people were, it was, I think the analogy I made in the book was, it was like I brought a two-headed puppy to gym class. It was fascinating, but, was there a reason why? People couldn't quite figure out, why I had this, this talent. And, really I had it because I had played a little bit.
You played it, yeah.
I was a pretty athletic guy, and I had played a little bit of soccer, but just playing that little bit made me so much better at it than anybody else. I figured, this is ridiculous. I was kind of kicking myself, pardon the pun, for not playing freshman year, and then that was it. From then, I knew I was going to play sophomore year.
Well, and when you talk about the history of soccer as a commercial sport now, and I'm sure you've studied this, and a lot of my memory on this has left me. You had a very vibrant period in and around New York in the 70s with the Cosmos, and we didn't know whether to call him Pele or Pele or Pele, and Canaglia and Shep Messing, and these the Meadowlands people were watching soccer, and that all seemed to sort of just kind of fritter away. Then you had a whole big thing with the women's soccer, like in the late 1990s, and kind of wondering, that didn't really seem to have the sustaining interest. Why has it always been with soccer? It's been like and I hate to draw this parallel, but it's almost been like roller derby. It gets really exciting, and then you don't hear about it, and then it gets really exciting, and you don't hear about it. And I don't have an explanation for that. And again, I'm giving you my perception.
Well, here's what I tell people, and I want to go back to the Cosmos in a second, because that's kind of a fascinating era. But here's what I tell people. In the United States, you have four, call it 3.75 major professional sports.
Mm-hmm.
Major League Soccer is kind of on the bubble. It's a separate discussion, really, because it is emerging and it is doing well. So call it add a half for Major League Soccer, so we'll call it 4.25. I give hockey 3/4. But I tell people, in the United States, you've got the best athletes and the best facilities for major professional sports imaginable. I think, and it's very simple. If you took the English Premier League or La Liga in Spain, the two best professional soccer leagues on the planet, and you imported them lock, stock, and barrel, meaning the facilities and the players, and the management for those leagues, and you put it in America, soccer would be equally popular with the other major professional sports. You would have 50, 60,000 people, showing up every week, fanatically devoted. Because Americans' expectations, no matter what the sport is to have the absolute best. So you have a product, you have Major League Soccer, which is a very fine league, but by virtually anybody's estimate, would be somewhere around the 10th or so best professional league in the world, maybe 10 to 15, say. Certainly behind, the big six, Germany, Italy, England, Spain, France, Holland, probably behind Belgium and a couple of other ones, probably behind Mexico, Brazil, Argentina. So, it's somewhere around 10 in the world. So what American, if the NFL put out the 10th best football league in the world, it would be, somewhat interesting, but it wouldn't be what it is. And the basketball or hockey. So, to me, it's just a very simple explanation. If it's not the best product, Americans are not going to be all in. Now, getting back to the, sort of the oscillations and the, sort of temporary insanity around the cosmos, that was, had a lot more to do with, Steve Ross at Warner Communications, a very adept and brilliant marketing strategy that he employed that, really had a lot of cloak and dagger behind it. It had, sort of a little bit of espionage and involving, Henry Kissinger and recruiting. It was really about star power and bringing in, Pele and a bunch of guys who were in the waiting part of their careers, but who still had a lot of ethnic draw, and it capitalized on the sort of emerging globalization of soccer, the World Cup in the 70s, and this really the emergence of soccer as a sport, but it was really the cult of celebrity that created that era, in my view.
It's really something, and I can tell you my observation. This is my Tony's cultural observation, which is worthless. But when I'm driving around on a Saturday, I now live in northeastern Connecticut, and no one's on baseball fields doing anything. There's a little league, who you see like between April and June, and that all gets over with. They start thinking about playoffs. The league is over. But what I do see, especially when I go back to Stamford, is a lot, and Ripplewam High School was there recently in the back. I don't think it's Ripplewam High School anymore. It's Ripplewam something else, but that ball field that was there forever and ever and ever, the ball field's really, it's kind of there, but it's not there, but across the outfield are two soccer goals, and you can just see the culture shifting to a more global acceptance of soccer. And I believe it's just because, we are changing as a people.
Well, soccer is ubiquitous now. In fact, my youngest son, who's 6, plays lacrosse. He's played some soccer, but, in a lot of ways, lacrosse is the new soccer, in my view. It's more of an emerging sport, albeit, highly established in a few regions, but it's booming in a lot of parts of the country where it was previously unknown. So I know lacrosse is the soccer of the future. I don't know if that's a good or bad observation, but soccer, I believe, has the highest participation rate of any youth sport in the country now. And it's the good and the bad. The good is that there are vastly more American kids playing soccer than ever before. But the bad, in several ways, is that there's still a generation of parents who were involved with soccer is finally there, but there's I always say that if you're a German kid or a Dutch kid or a Brazilian kid and you're coming up through the system, there's an acknowledged way to play. There's an established culture. There's an established kind of mindset, and the Europeans have an entirely different way of cultivating talent through their academy system. But in America, we tend to want to impose this kind of clipboard and whistle culture on all the sports we play. And, hence you've got, kids kind of standing around on these little kids on these vast fields, playing in a system rather than getting a lot of touches. Lionel Messi, the best soccer players in the world, grew up, for the most part, in lower middle, indigent to lower middle class circumstances, shall we say, and that tends to produce a very, very hard-scrabble, but a mindset where you get in a lot of play in a lot of different conditions on an informal basis, and that culture doesn't exist in America. So it's an interesting kind of contrast in terms of how players are developed.
It is interesting, and I can't believe it, Dan. We're out of time, and again, I want to reintroduce your book to our viewers and listeners. It's entitled Soccer in the Weeds, Bad-Hair Jews and Chasing the Beautiful Game. And Dan, where can you be reached, and where can the book be purchased?
The book right now is available on Amazon as a print copy and will be available as a digital download in all the major systems in about 2 weeks, my publisher has told me. And there is a Soccer in the Weeds web link with my contact info, and I'd love to make myself available to anybody who wants to continue the conversation or dialogue. And I want to thank you so much, Tony, for all the great questions and discussion about Stanford.
In many respects, you had to be there, but I think you did such a great job in describing it that more people can relate to perhaps what you and I had experienced. And I thank you so much. Have a great day today. I'm sure you got a lot more sun than we do in merry old New Haven. And take care. We'll be talking soon, my friend. Be well.
Okay. Thanks so much, Tony.
Bye now.
Bye.
And with that, that was Dan Lilie, author of Soccer in the Weeds. We come upon the end of another segment of Connecticut Morning, the April 23rd, 2013 edition. We'll be back in 2 weeks with what's shaping to be a fantastically interesting show.